and then we'll just continue. Sorry about that, folks. Record. That's it. Right. Hello, Pat. How are you? We're just talking about there.
Hi. Good to see you. Good to see you, man.
And we also have Gareth Slate-Home, and Bruno Stahl has joined us. Is Bruno there?
Yeah.
Bruno did Jurassic Punk. Yeah. And two of my favourite characters there, Dada Derda and Joe Megiddo, which I hope go on for a long, long time. And Bruno, I noticed in his credits, had been praised by no less than Richard Corbin. So I'm very impressed. Is Bruno there? Yes?
Yeah,
hello?
Can you hear me?
He did join.
Yeah.
Hello there. How are you?
Good to see
Is
you
everything
all.
okay, Bruno?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you get involved with Spacewalk?
Sorry, the audio is quite low.
How did you get involved with Spacewalk? Are we having a Zoom problem?
Yeah, the audio is quite bad right now. I tried to.
Okay.
We could come back to you.
Yeah, we'll come back to you.
Yeah, move on.
There's some other Spacewalk artists here as well. There's Ian Ashcroft, James Newell, and Simon Hotchkiss Rogers.
Right.
Oh yeah, hi. Sorry, right in the middle there.
Right.
Hi, Simon. And hi,
There's
hi, James.
There's now 37 people have joined us, and I've only ever done this with 3 people, so this is I'm having to take notes here. Ian Ashcroft, Hellbreaker. Can we hear from Ian? Is he in there?
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
How did you get involved with Spacewalk, Ian?
Well, I've been doing some small press work with Accent UK and released a comic called Keir Wordsmith. And I'd also done some work with Tony Esmond on the Awesome Comics podcast. And then Johnny Ottaway, who's on this call, kindly contacted me and said, have you heard Pat Mills is looking for artists? So I hadn't. So I had a look on Pat's website and I looked through all the different stories, and Hellbreaker was the one that I was drawn to the most. So then I started to produce some work that I was putting up on Instagram. Pat noticed it, said he liked it, so that gave me a bit more confidence. And then I submitted a page, I think it was page 7 that Pat had asked for.
Hardest page.
The hardest page it was.
Deliberately.
So, I sent that to Pat, and he got back and he said I was on board. So that was an amazing feeling. And then we just went from there, and Pat gave me loads of advice and guidance because I'm quite new to comics and I needed probably a bit more support than the other artists, and just took me through the process. It was just a fantastic education, really, and such a pleasure to be involved in a project like this. So yeah, that's how I got involved, and I'm looking forward to hopefully getting on phase 2 and carrying on the story of Hellbreaker. And yeah, it's been lovely to read all the feedback and all the great reviews we've been getting. So all of it's just been, like I said, a great experience. Along with getting paid this month as well, that was pretty good too. So.
A bonus. Yeah. And are you working on anything else just now, Ian?
Yeah, since I've worked on Hellbreaker, I've just done a 24-page, it's the 3rd issue of Keir Wordsmith, so that'll be coming to Kickstarter either next month or the month after. I'm working with another small press creator on a different project entirely, but that's just in its starting points, really, just on design stuff. And then that's it really at the moment, and then we'll see where we go from there. But I'm a full-time secondary school teacher as well, so it's difficult at the moment doing all the planning and recording and everything for that. So
is that all on Zoom as well?
Teams, that's all on Teams. So this is all
Microsoft Teams.
yeah, this is all I do all week. Just sit looking at my laptop, staring at people's faces.
Is it going okay so far? What age group do you teach?
11 to 16. So yeah, it's going well as you can expect. I mean, the students are from quite a deprived area, so they all got free iPads, and so they're all set up now so they can engage in lessons. It's been good.
This very subtly leads into a question I was going to ask. Do you use comics in teaching?
Yeah, we do a whole scheme of work. Well, I made sure there was did a whole scheme of work on it. It's sort of like an anatomy lesson, looking at proportions of the figure and stuff like that. But we tie it into then going away and creating their own. We call it the Eco Warrior project. So they go away and create their own Eco Warrior and design that around what kind of special powers they'd have and what they'd need. So it allows them to learn about the proportions of the figure, but then go on to create and be creative and design characters and backstories and stuff like that for the characters. So get some really good ideas from that.
Well, that sounds quite exciting.
Yeah.
Pat, I don't know if
Yeah,
I don't know if I ever told you, but years ago.
Sorry,
Pat.
No, go ahead.
There you go. I don't know if I ever told you, but years ago in a previous life, when I was a secondary teacher, I used Charlie's War to teach the First World War, because it's difficult for people who are. Well, I've never seen a battlefield to imagine what it's like in these trenches and the stuff that's going on. And you and Joe Cahoon summed up that whole atmosphere and made those First World War poems that you're expected to teach, even though they're very depressing. But it brought it all alive, and we used Charlie's War. And then one of my students insisted that we look at Slane because he wanted to talk about the Irish annals. So you've been used in my old college at least twice by me.
I think,
do you like the idea of comics in teaching?
Yeah, I think if for example, with Charlie's War, if I hadn't written those very left of center commentaries in the back of the books, they'd probably be on a teaching list somewhere. I know they're on an unofficial, but because there's all this anti-establishment abuse by me in the back, I can't see any government body ordering those books. But I know that unofficially, many teachers throughout the country use Charlie's War because, I mean, Joe's evocation of the battles is you know, he's just a world-class artist. I was so lucky to have him, to be working with him. It was just fantastic. Coming back to Ian, I just wanted to add a footnote that one of the reasons why I was particularly drawn to Ian's work is, and I think somewhere down the line, hopefully within Spacewalk, that will reach a wide audience. He's a natural, and I say this in a complimentary way, he's got that Twilight buzz, you know, that appeal to adolescence, that kind of romantic comic strip look that was quite widespread in the past, but has, I don't know, it's not really been focused on in recent years. And so if there was ever some great teen love graphic novel, I mean, Ian is the natural one to do it. And you look at Hellbreaker, I mean, it's really hot. And I was saying to Ian that, you know, with Valentine's Day coming up tomorrow, you know, we might see an example of him drawing, you know, these very romantic, very sexy characters he draws. And that's his, I think, unique selling point that you need to major on, in my view, not just on Hellbreaker, but elsewhere. You probably do. I mean, all your characters look really hot. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Pat. That's very kind. Yeah, it's difficult when you because when you're aiming a book at a younger audience as well, with a character like DLR, who's the central character in Hellbreaker, I had to think about how I was going to design him for a long time, because I knew I wanted it to appeal to younger readers. And a guy in a tux, you could either go towards like a Sean Connery, James Bond, or a Bruce Wayne or something like that. And we didn't really want that. So getting that character's look right was really quite difficult. And making him someone who's going to appeal to the younger readership as well was really important. So hopefully that's one of the reasons why I hope my art is well suited to Hellbreaker, because we could find a slightly different look to him, maybe perhaps a younger look as well. So
the chemistry between De La Rue, the Hellbreaker, and the female cop who's coming after him. I mean, it's really there on the page. It was in my script, but there would be many artists who would not be able to evoke that feeling. So I'd have to compensate for it in other ways. But in your case, I don't have to. I mean, you can really see that they're, from their body language, the way they're looking at each other, that it's got that potential of Killing Eve, I think, you know, that kind of
that would be wonderful.
Go, you know.
Thank you.
Plenty of film material there, eh? Plenty of film material. Did James Newell appear? Is James about?
I want to say he's over there.
Over there.
Can you hear me there okay?
In the virtual space.
Hear me?
Yes, James.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. Hi. How's it going?
Yeah. I'm John.
Hi, Anthony.
You did Flair, and you're also the letterer. I think letterers are incredibly important. There's an old strip, Little Nemo in Slumberland, where the artwork's absolutely magnificent. And the
thanks very much.
lettering is about as bad as it gets. I think a letterer can really enhance the look of a page. So how did you get involved with Spacewalk?
Yeah, I seen it come up on Pat's blog.
How did you get involved?
I seen it come up on Pat's blog, and and I just threw in an email through the blog there, and just to get involved, really. So, I think I asked, I'll do art or lettering or anything at all. I just wanted to be involved with the project.
You'd previously done work for Zarjaz, is that correct?
Yeah, I've been doing work with Zarjaz for the last number of years. It's good work. They're good guys.
And you're based in Ireland, yeah?
Yeah, West Coast in Galway.
Oh, the nice bit.
Yeah, great city. If I was, you know, I've thought about moving to Ireland from time to time, and Galway was always the number one. Yeah,
it's because of the storms. That's right.
Lovely place.
I saw Phil Vaughan's name there. Is Phil about? Hello, Phil.
He was earlier. He's dropped.
Yes, John, I am. Yeah, hi, John. Hi.
So how did you get involved, Phil? What was your involvement in the Spacewalk project?
I was very much on the edges, John. I just came in quite late in the day just to help out on some of the marketing stuff with Lisa, and did a little video piece and a couple other bits.
Yeah, you did the video. Yeah, well, that was important. Yeah.
Well, it was easy because all the artwork was there, and it was great. I got all the artwork given to me unlettered, so I could sort of semi-animate it. We threw something together started it last April, I think, around about that time. And then there was a couple of just interior things, just small jobs, but it was great to be involved. And subsequently, actually, Pat and Lisa did a class for me. I've just taken on a new role at De Montfort, teaching concept and comics art. And we've actually got a kind of live project at the moment that Pat wrote a script for the students. Maybe Pat can talk a little bit about that. We're in the process of that at the moment. It's quite exciting.
And so the course is going quite well, Phil?
Yeah, it's all been run remotely at the moment, so much like
yeah,
it's all done through Teams mostly.
Okay, and I see
Sorry.
Who's not getting a lot of free adverts here? It's Microsoft Teams that are getting the adverts. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Phil said there, that so his class are going to all draw their own version of a special 4-page story of Futant that I wrote for the occasion. And it features new characters and so on. And that's an incredibly demanding thing to ask of them. And as Phil said, he wanted to really throw them in the deep end and really challenge them, rather than, what shall we say, if you look at manga, for example, the stories can be quite slow. They only have one figure, do you know what I mean, who appears over several pages, close-ups of heads and so forth. Whereas the British tradition, of which I'm probably a prime example, is you throw in everything bar the kitchen sink on every page, because that's actually certainly what younger readers want. They want the lot. They want action, story, etc., etc. So I wrote this 4-page story with that in mind, and I'm going to be very looking forward to what the artists, the students, come up with, because we did a session with them, and I think their age group was around 19, 20, that sort of thing. And they were coming out with their original pictures for stories. And I was gobsmacked how good they were. I've done this kind of virtual work with students in the past, and they often look really bored, like when it's in lunch, you know. But these guys were really on it. They really, I don't know how they all came together, Phil, but you have an amazing class there. So I'm expecting something pretty awesome, I think.
Well, I actually saw, just as briefly, I actually saw some of the initial thumbnails yesterday. We did a class yesterday. I've not forwarded them on yet, Pat. I should have been more prepared and had them ready to show, because some of the results are looking really good. And what's interesting, they're all working on the same script. So you've got about 30 students all with different interpretations of that script, which is a real good test of how different people approach a script. And it's brilliant from a teaching point of view, because you could put them together as a cohort and have that kind of peer learning, as well as, you know, having that individual one-to-one session. So it's been a brilliant learning experience, and it's great to have the opportunity. So thanks for that.
Is that why it was 4 pages, to make it manageable for everybody?
Sorry, John, that to cut out a little bit there. Could you say that?
Is that why it was 4 pages, just to make it manageable for everybody?
It was kind of it was more of a test. I mean, what I wanted was something that was sort of grounded in some sort of reality. So having the parameters in place of 4 pages and having to work to someone else's script rather than your own thing, it puts in certain parameters that are useful when you're teaching. Someone's asked in the comments, how long do they have? They've got a whole semester, but really it's only, if you count it, 1 day a week for about 12 weeks. So essentially it's 2 weeks, I suppose, in real world times. Obviously they're working it out with that as well. But what was great about the script, again, because of the subject matter, it combined that kind of the school aspect with the sort of science fiction elements, the fantasy elements. It means that they have to draw from life. So they're not just doing kind of manga-esque kind of work, which Pat kind of touched upon. I'm a massive fan of manga and anime, but at this stage, in the early stages of development, I wanted them to concentrate on core drawing skills, and this script certainly plays up to that.
That sounds very exciting, Phil. Yeah, we'll hear more about that in the future. Yeah.
Sure.
I gather Simon Hodgkiss Rogers is with us. Simon there? Yes, there he is up in the corner. Hello. How did you get involved, Simon? You did the logos and designs, which is crucially important. Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
No.
Yeah.
On mute.
How's that?
Hey, hi, Simon.
Yes.
How are you all doing?
We're all doing great.
Good.
So tell us all doing Spacewalk.
I was actually first artist to jump on SpaceWarp. I heard about it like the moment that Pat put out any word about it, to be honest. And I stayed up that night and drew an entire panel for Jurassic Man, which was a story that really spoke to me. I was the first artist on Jurassic Man as it was then, but I'm disabled and had a lot of health issues that came up. I was about 5 pages into the project at the time, as Pat will tell you, and like as in 5 pretty much finished pages, and I had to just leave because of my health, unfortunately. I'd also done like the warp though for Pat, and we'd gone over a lot of story elements for SpaceWarp. Like it was while it was Pat and I were talking one of the days via email, and like I said about the Lords of the Warp as well, and like I was like, I see these creatures that sort of run the whole show, and Pat went, "That's brilliant." Kind of thing. It was so I'm really like happy that I saw those things come to life by another artist. Don't get me wrong, but it was amazing. And yeah, like I've been a fan of Pat's work since the 1980s. I was a little kid and saw like someone gave me one of the comics, Slain, and I just fell in love with Pat's writing. So as soon as I heard that he got this project coming up and needed artists, I instantly jumped on, stayed up the entire night, drew out a whole panel that I've still got actually. Very rough. It was just a rough thing, but Pat saw it and went, "Yeah, that's it," and like got straight back to him, and he was like, "If you can tidy it up," because like I said, I had stayed up the entire night, drawn this rough, and Pat just saw something in it, and we worked probably for best part of a year almost, and then like I say, I unfortunately had to walk away due to my health. I was hospitalized rather badly and still suffering now with all that. So it's been a bit of a slog, but I've got like pages and pages of work that I did for what was then Jurassic Man, which it's a very different story to Jurassic Punks, but along the same line. But it focused more on the solitude of this one person that was like basically in a torn world because of how the warps come along. And then he meets the young girl that's the punk as he's basically almost prepared to die at the hands of the dinosaurs, because he's just walking through this city on his own. There's nothing left anywhere apart from destruction and death and these creatures that are trying to pull him apart. He's lost his whole family, and as he's walking through, we see him remembering that family and sort of talking to them. And yeah, it was a very different story and a lot slower pace. And like it ultimately became Jurassic Punks. And there are bits in Jurassic Punks where you go, "Oh yeah, you can see where Pat's gone, okay, we'll keep that bit and we'll move from it." And so it's changed completely, but it's also very similar in parts. And it's amazing to look at, because like I say, having the original panels as well, and it's like, okay, that little tiny bit there, that's because I said that. And then like with Pat, it's incredible. I was really lucky to be involved with Pat. I've been he is pretty much a hero. And so when he said like, yeah, come on board, I was just flabbergasted. And then, like I say, things didn't work out quite as I wanted, but yeah, it was an incredible experience doing anything with the guy, because talking with him, you see the pieces of how this comic is coming together, just slowly falling in place. And then one day he clicks with it, and the next thing, it's just all there. And he's like, "Yeah, this is how it's working." And you're like, "How did you do that?" He's just incredible with how he works it all.
Can I just say, I think Simon, you were really instrumental in crystallizing the warp itself. We didn't actually have a clear visual idea.
Not at all. No.
Of that sort of visual representation of what it was, and you came up with that. And so, that is, as John said, that is how we then developed the logo. Your warp is actually in the sort of end papers kind of thing.
That's on page 1, yeah.
Yeah, and
yeah.
The one that
It was amazing seeing that.
So, you know, that was really crucial, that kind of identity, you know, giving the warp itself an identity, and it kind of brought in that kind of sinister element.
Yeah.
Until it's kind of made flesh, it's just a kind of concept.
Of course. Now, as soon as I talked about the warp with Pat, like the image that I got in my head was just this galaxy that's sort of almost coming in and tearing apart everything. So it's sharp, it's jagged, but it's got these tendrils that you can imagine just pulling at space. So like as soon as we spoke, I got the image in my head, and I was just like, I'll draw that.
Well, that was the thing with Simon, just to come in here. And we've said this before, that Simon has so many ideas, and you know, even someone who's 100% fit would have trouble keeping up with them. And you say, hey, I want to draw that as well. And I say, okay, well, let's have a look at it. And it was always inspiring. So there were, I always described Simon as, for people who know about 2000 AD, that there was the art supremo, Doug Church, who very much inspired me, and we inspired each other. And I think Simon is very much the Doug Church of Spacewalk, in as much as he would always keep coming up with these new ideas and these wonderful ideas. And we had trouble keeping up with them, but they were all great. Warp Lords.
Thank you.
And coming back to, for example, Jurassic Punks, or Jurassic Man as it then was, is an interesting example of how stories develop, because I like the look of Simon's original drawing. And I remember discussing this with Lisa and saying, we're going to set it in New York, of course, because I'd seen the Omega Man, and most apocalypses happen in New York, with some justification, I think.
Yeah, it's always put me off going.
Yeah, there's always a disaster there. And so I looked at that. I thought, you know what, could we, I don't know if this artist has a feeling for New York. I mean, these places, the buildings in the background, they look like a shopping precinct on a fairly tough housing estate.
I drew it based on the shopping precinct, like just down the road from me. I was like, yeah, that's what I want. You know?
I thought as much. And so then Lisa said to me, well, why do you have to have it set in New York anyway? You know, in other words, what is it with this this kind of a base to, you know, it's always, it's got to be New York or Los Angeles or whatever. And she rightly said, why don't you set it in Britain? And of course I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. So then I said to Simon, whereabouts do you live in Britain? And he said Stoke-on-Trent, which I barely know of. But both Lisa and I know Liverpool, which is arguably not that far away. And so that's when we decided to go for Liverpool. And of course, this drew us down another rabbit hole, because Liverpool arguably has some of the finest architecture, you know, city urban architecture is wonderful, because it's also demanding on the artist. And then
it was brilliant though. I love drawing that. Like I spent time just looking at those buildings, and I was like, yeah, I can see. And Pat had asked for Liver building specifically, and I saw I saw like images of it that a great friend of mine who's just popped up in the chat. He actually lives in Liverpool, and he was like, I'll go and take photos for you. And so he spent the day like walking around taking pics all around the actual base of the Liver building as well, so I could post it in the actual street that was directly under it. I could do this sort of failing, degrading city that the dinosaurs were sort of encroaching upon as Gerard was walking through. And it was all based, so if somebody was walking that knew the area, they'd be able to like read the comic and go, that's literally right there, you know? And I wanted to do little bits like that for it. And Pat picked up on it, and he was like, that is, these Easter eggs that we got, it made the comic come to life, you know?
Well, the thing also was that at this point, Jurassic Man was the only story that I think I was kind of connecting with an artist over, because I was still writing the others. So it kind of set the template for the stand.
Yeah.
Oh,
Internet's dropped.
yes.
We wanted
Well,
to
we'll
do
just
all
keep
the
talking.
stories. And this kind of interaction, okay, yeah. They sometimes just, yeah. So looking at, just coming back to just a couple more things on Jurassic Man, I think some of it, that the Omega Man, rather gloomy character, I think you brought something out there rather special. Do you know what I mean? The main character had a certain energy. If you like, maybe it was a kind of alter ego of yourself or something, but it's
very much, yeah.
I felt that. And so it's interesting that often with all, and this goes for all stories really, that obviously it's true for the writer as well, that the characters are often fantasy alter egos of the artist. So
totally,
if one artist is particularly, what should we say, up or particularly down, that's going to be reflected in the story. And it's better, in my view, to go with that and to go with that energy flow, rather than say, oh, can you make it more upbeat? And the artist involved might say, well, actually, you know, my dad just died, and you know, my hamster's dead, and you know, I don't feel particularly up. So it's better to go with what to bring out from the artist, whatever they're personally going through, within reason. I mean, there's one famous example which I think you'll know about, John, that there was an artist who did a really great horror series for France, bande dessinée. So it's really bad taste, it's really vile, and it has a big following, you know, because they're French, and just as we'd like it as well, probably. And then somewhere down the line, he got married or whatever, and so his wife has a kid, and he's suddenly full of this tender love and compassion for the human race, and oh, my baby, and all this kind of stuff. So he starts bringing that into his work, and sales go crash, they go right down. It was Fashid, Comics USA, who told me the story. And so Fashid said to him, fuck's sake, you know, get back to the misery and the pain. You don't want to know about, you know, the joys of fatherhood. The readers don't care.
That's it. Well, I mean, that's where a lot of the solitude that Jurassic Man had when we started, that's where that came from, because like with my disability, I was partially paralyzed a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now. And like, I'm literally stuck in the house 24/7. I can't even get out my front door without a fleet of people coming to help me, basically, which I get outside maybe 3 times a year, and that's even into the garden. I don't generally get out in the living room. And that's where a lot of the solitude parts for Jurassic Man came from, because of course, like, I have to run through things in my head to try and get some escape occasionally, to be honest. And that's where a lot of my art comes from. Actually, all of it. It's all about my escape. And I think that really showed, especially in the early parts of Jurassic Man, where he's just so alone because he's walking through these cities and there's nothing and no one. And occasionally he'll see an obstacle to climb, but that's all that he's got in those opening pages, just obstacles. That's his company. And that was very reflective of my own life, even like, in fact, even more so during COVID, because of course people can't come along now and assist me to get outside. So the only time I've been out is to go to hospital in the back of an ambulance. So at the moment, like, my artwork is even more reflective of battle and obstacles, and that's all you're really seeing now. Like, I'm doing a piece for Spacewalk right now. But yeah, I'm not sure whether it'll come up.
Hey, let's see.
And that's my original version idea of the Warp Lords. That's how I saw them in my head.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
and
that's really good.
our guys.
That's great. And as always, lovely black and white work there.
Yeah,
one of the other things that attracted me to your work is that
thank you.
You have that kind of classic black and white style.
Thank you, Phil.
My old art editor, Doug Church, always approved of. He disapproved of artists using pens.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd have approved of Carlos Esquerra, or I can't remember what Carlos used, but it's certainly not a brush as far as I'm aware. But I like that kind of, there's that European tradition of that very strong black and white artwork, which you seem to gradually, you've come to that very naturally. And I was just going to add a footnote. There's probably not much solace for your situation, but doubtless you are aware of, there's any number, I say any number, there's a number of creators, writers, artists, musicians who, life has dealt them some shit cards, and it's forced them into that kind of creative process that you're describing. And so I hope somewhere down the line that not just on Spacewalk, but elsewhere, that you get the kind of reward for that. Do you know what I mean? Your work is acknowledged, but it's hard when you're just living inside your own head, as it were.
Exactly.
But then we're all doing it now on one level.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't have out much,
in all honesty, like, I've seen a lot of people talking about, like, with COVID, they don't get to go outside, that they're stuck in, and they're feeling like claustrophobic and whatnot with it. And I'm like, I can completely relate, because those first few months, especially, are a massive adjustment process. And I went through that a few years ago, like back in 2014, 2015, when it was starting. I'd already broached the process people have now been going through in the last few months. So when my friends are talking about it, saying, I've got no creativity left in me because I'm feeling so pent up, I'm like, okay, use it. Don't think of it like that. Think of it as, okay, what does it create? It creates claustrophobia. So turn your hand to doing some horror, and try writing about this. Keep a diary of what's going on so you can look at those feelings later as well, which is something I do a lot of, especially at night, because I suffer insomnia greatly. I don't sleep any more than 2 hours a day. And so I'll keep at night, when I'm completely alone, a diary of how I'm feeling at that time, including with sketches. And then I'll use those later. I'll go, right, that was really good. Yeah, let's bring that into this story and start writing something there. And I've got like about 4 comics that I've started writing. I've got about 6 pages of each one done.
I want to come in on you there, Simon, because all of us, writers as well as artists, have exactly this issue. We all have endless projects on the go, and the challenge, particularly for you, but because I remember thinking at the time, is find some model where you can complete the project. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I'm the same. I've got 4 books that I'm meant to write, as well as Spacewalk. There's probably a couple of other things as well. And I think all of us as creators, we think, oh yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And if you can find the magic key whereby you can start something, go to the middle, and finish it.
Yeah.
I think that's a great objective. And if you figure out how to do it, let me know.
I've done it with one of mine now. Like, as in, I've got to a point where I can send it off and try and get it published, essentially. I wanted to send it to you, actually, Pat, see what you think. Because I've got like 6 pages drawn, coloured as well. I've actually gone for colour on this one.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's the sort of thing that Pat would like to read. Because it's about time travel, but it's all actually using historical characters, but only if it's again the Easter egg thing. And it's kind of, you could almost fit it in to Spacewalk, because it's about a guy going through time to stop it being destroyed and taken advantage of by these people that have figured out how to travel themselves. And basically some unknown force has plucked him out of his own time and gone, you're the only person that we can see at the moment that would be able to stop these. So go and do it, or we erase you. That's it. There's no ever you. And that's essentially his weapon. And yeah, I'm writing little bits like that quite a lot. and essentially drawing them out because it keeps me busy. But I'm finding that, again, through this whole COVID thing, other people are mentioning things, and it inspires that little spark in yourself, and you can go, right, that's what I want to do. Like I can riff off that a bit and turn it into something, and talk with them, and like try and come up with projects with other people as well. I think that's very important. That's what Pat managed to do perfectly with SpaceWarp, was turn it into a project with other people that can synchronize with each other without even meeting. Actually, they got all that artwork done to make a perfect little comic that didn't have any influence over each other apart from Pat syncing it all together in the middle. And it was a really incredible feat when you think about it. And I think we need more of that in British comics, especially. Like I say, especially with British comics, they've sort of walked away from the energy that they've had for all these years, and they're now trying to latch on to things. Whereas Pat didn't do that. He just went, okay, this is what we're doing. Yeah, we've got an audience we want to target, but let's tell a story rather than try and just bring people in with nothing there, no substance. And like I say, SpaceWarp, it had these stories that Pat very clearly saw, and wanted to tell actual tales rather than just try and get some readers in just for the sake of it, which other publications, which will remain nameless, seem to do quite a lot. That's something that I really respected, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to join SpaceWarp, just because of that. It's fantastic.
Oh,
That's great. That's great, Simon. A couple of questions have been popping up in the chat, if I can address them. First of all, just talk to Simon there. You're going to need a kind of Blu-ray edition of SpaceWarp, maybe to include the original version of Jurassic Pan and things like that.
There's a few pages that are,
have you thought
they just need
about
lettering. That
doing
could
other
be
editions? I
something
mean, I
really
know
cool.
you had a digital extra story, which was great.
Oh, my sound's gone. Bear with me.
Sound went
Yeah.
on that one, John. Sorry,
Yeah.
could you say that again?
And
Sure.
Pat, the digital stuff, is the sound going?
A bit.
The sound's cutting out.
Is that me to say it again? Hello?
We can hear you
Right.
now.
I'm very good at
I
sign.
was talking about, right, sign language, that's it. I was talking about all the extras. You put out a digital extra story, which was a good idea. And all that stuff that Simon's got, it'd be nice to include that somewhere. I was calling it a Blu-ray edition with all the extras.
Yeah, I get you.
Someone asked me if I had paid extra for some movie I bought during lockdown, and I said, "There's more extras than there is a film. It's
Yeah.
great. There's all these interviews and stuff." So I think we need Blu-ray comics. Okay.
You know, with the digital era, though, that's something that you can actually sort of look
A
at doing.
question popped up there, Pat. How far into the future have you planned the stories in SpaceWarp? Yes.
About, I would say.
Have we lost Pat there? Hello,
No,
Pat.
I can hear you.
Can everyone hear us?
How far into the future?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'd say
Good.
about
Yes.
that I've got the practical essentials of all the stories. I haven't probably got the ending on any of them, or at least what shall we say, end of book 1, end of book 2, etc. Because I want to see how the artists pace the stories and also how far I get into the characters. Now, I know in a movie, you always work back from the ending. But in a comic, especially when it's episodic, you have to work back from each section, because the readers, particularly younger readers, have no tolerance for a great ending, 50 pages down the line. They want jam on their bread right here, right now. So it's a different flavor, if you like, to writing for, what shall we say, adult readers exclusively, who can be quite tolerant of going with the writing craft and slowing things down. Younger readers won't. They want it in your face, right here, right now. And if I had to make a choice, I would always prioritize that younger mainstream audience. And thus far, that seems to have paid off, I think. Yeah.
Another question I was asked, Pat, was the European market. How healthy is that at the moment, or has it stagnated a bit?
Well, whenever you talk to the French, they will always say, "Oh, it's not very good. This has gone wrong. That's gone wrong," and all the rest of it. Because I think that's an international comic fan phenomena, isn't it? Things aren't very good at the moment. You know what I mean? But what I would say is that the bande dessinée shops, as far as I know, the majority are there. They've obviously been hit by COVID. And I think France in particular will have a problem because they don't ascribe to digital in a way that the Americans do. And we Brits will tolerate a certain amount of digital comics, not too much, but a bit. But I think on balance, yeah, I think the European market is still healthy. And I have a series, Requiem Vampire Night, where the artist is Olivier Ledoir is returning to it, I think, in 2 years, which if you're an editor, you will know means 3 years.
One of my favorite comics.
Yeah, I wish it would be complete, but there you go. I'm at his mercy. Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure how to do this, but I'd quite like participation from some of the other people who have joined us. Is there a button one presses, or do you wave your hands and attract my attention, or put something up on chat and I'll see your name? Let's just try that for a wee sec.
You can press raise hand. I'm not sure whether you actually see. Can you guys see that I got my hand raised from before?
You have to open the participants box.
Anthony, you might want to talk to Bruno as well. Bruno hasn't had a say yet.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Bruno, right. Okay. Here's Bruno.
I had a bit of a trouble, setting this thing up. So
yes,
I think we are ready to go now.
Okay, Bruno. How did you get involved with Spacewarp, and have you enjoyed the process?
I saw that Pat was looking for artists on Facebook, and I just got in touch, and I've done like a tryout for a different strip on SpaceWarp, and Pat found the right artist for that strip, like the particular strip, and a couple of days later, he came back to me offering a Jurassic Month, because as Simon explained, he had to drop out, and his health issues, and I was yeah, I'm more than happy, say yeah, and for me, it turned out quite a ride, because Jurassic Punk's it seems to be the perfect strip for the kind of things I enjoy drawing, which is like a post-apocalyptic punks and dinosaurs, and one thing about Simon original design to Spacewalk, like is I've done like there's like a panel in Jurassic Park where like you can see like the spacewalk like opening again, and originally I drew the spacewalk like I've say I'm gonna do my own design, and you know, and it was rubbish, like it was like a total disaster. And like I'm quite ashamed actually to like, oh, I've shown this piece of crap to Pat, you know, like this is terrible, and they'll say, okay, I'm gonna do like the original design. I'm gonna follow Simon's design for Spacewalk, and like and it was like yeah, that's it, you know, like that's the Spacewalk. That's absolutely correct. Like I don't have to add anything to it.
Thank
It
you.
was spot on, man. Like seriously, is good, man. Great.
Thank you, man.
job.
That means a lot. Because I
And I
loved
think-
seeing your Jurassic Punks. When I got to read it, I was like, this is brilliant. Like it's distinctly different to mine, but I can also see like, okay, yeah, I'd have drawn that like that. You know what I mean? It's so cool.
Oh, cheers, man. Yeah. So that's like a, you know, it's a testament like to Simon's design, original design, as they like, yeah, there's nothing I can improve upon. Like, so I'm gonna do that. And like Pat was like a really happy like with the result, and I'll say like, yeah, that's it. Like we got it done. And it was a bit of a challenge, you know, because I wasn't that like because the story is set in Liverpool, and I haven't been to Liverpool before starting working on the strip. So there was a point I say, okay, I need to go to Liverpool, like, and you know, like, I need to feel like those characters, you know, like I need to be in like standing on the same spot, like you know, and see like the geography of the action, you know, like where like the characters they start out from, and like to the point like they get to the cathedral. Like so I say, okay, I'm gonna take my own picture, you know, my own like a reference material, like, and as mentioned previously, like Liverpool is beautiful, like it's fantastic. Yeah, architecture there, like it's just like this. There's nothing else. Like it is really like that kind of art decor, you know, like early 20s, you know, like it's fantastic. And I was like,
the city itself is a character, isn't it? You know.
Exactly. And I was trying to, because talk about like a New York, and you get to the very specific iconography of New York, like with like old Marvel stuff, like a DC comic stuff, like a Jack Kirby drawing those water towers on the top of the buildings, you know, like the American trash can, like it became like a kind of iconographic, you know, for comics. And with Liverpool, like say, like, well, this could be exactly the same thing, you know, like for British comics, like you've got like a city like that that's very like a remarkable, you know. And as Simon said, like is a character itself, like a mega city, like a Gotham City, you know, like, and I try my best, you know, to make it justice, like to make like a Liverpool to look like a fantastical, but at the same time grounded in reality, you know, like how the city looks like in reality. And yeah, if you say like we got like Joe, Dada, and Liverpool as like the main characters in Jurassic Park, and it was great fun. Sorry,
enough, Ian Rankin said to me many years ago, the one thing he liked about the Bogeyman was the city of Glasgow in it, because he could see all the architecture in the city as a character. And that's what he aims at in his Rebus novels, that Edinburgh is one of the characters. It's an essential part of the story. So I totally know what you're talking about there. Yeah. Pat, someone just asked, did you find writing for Spacewalk different from the usual way in which you write for 2000 AD, etc.?
Oh. No,
It dropped out again.
No,
Must be the
I heard
screen.
you okay, John.
There you are.
No, it was the same
Okay.
the same process, exactly the same process, with one significant difference, and this applies to the artists as well, that the meter is not ticking. Now, when I worked for 2000 AD, because they pay peanuts royalties, the page rate's okay, but it's only okay if you don't spend time developing the story. Now, I've worked it out, and I would say that this is probably true for all of us in one form or another, that the development time on a story is around 6 weeks. Now, if it's a begat of a begat, it may be less, but if you're starting with something from cold, like Jurassic Man, which then becomes Jurassic Punks, that process is around 6 weeks for a writer. Now, it's not all in one block, but it happens. So what it means is that you go through, shall we say, 3 drafts, which is normal for a writer. And the artist will go through a similar process if they were to clock up the amount of time they spend. But the nature of selling all rights comics is that you have to look for shortcuts because you've got to pay your mortgage, you've got to feed your kids. So what do? So you are giving Rebellion 6 weeks work for nothing. And that obviously is very difficult. And I've had 2 well-known 2000 AD artists who've actually had to turn down scripts because they know that they can't spend that amount of time developing things. So on Spacewalk, there is that 6-week development time. And as the comic continues to sell well over a period of time, hopefully shorter rather than later, the artist and the writer will get back not just their page rate, so to speak, but additional royalties, which will cover that development time. So that's the major difference for all of us is we're thinking, let's move it from New York to Liverpool. And then, well, let's change this character and that character. That's a normal part of the creative process. But when you're working for 2000 AD, you can't do that. You've just got to go bang. That's the way it is. And that's why you get this kind of begat writers and artists who are building on the past so that they don't have to go through the development time, which is not painful. It's only painful when you don't get paid for it or it's not valued or appreciated. But I can assure everyone on Spacewalk, all that agonizing that Bruno was describing, where he does one version of the warp and then he says, no, it's not right. Let's go for another. That's how things should be. And creators should be able to say, right, I'm going to put that in the bin and start again, rather than, oh my God, as Ron Smith, the 2000 AD artist, brilliant artist. I don't know how he managed this, but his artwork was always wonderful. But you probably know the story where he had an hourglass or something. And as the sands of time ran out, he'd turn his page to the wall and say, right, that's your lot. You've got your money's worth. That's it. And when you look at what he was doing, that's incredible. But on Spacewalk, we don't have that. And I don't think any of the artists have got a sense of, well, the clock's ticking, you've got your lot. And so that's the big difference, I think.
Pat, will Spacewalk be available in other languages? I mean, you're based in Europe, where Scotland used to be a member of Europe, but England took us out of it. And is Spacewalk going to appear in other languages?
The obvious one would be France, I think. And I think I would imagine that to make it work in France, we would probably have to have several issues because they're going to say, well, when's the next issue? This kind of stuff, as they do in Britain as well. So a one-off might be a little bit of a hard sell. The good news, though, is that years ago, the French would always say, "Oh no, it has to be in full color," and that's no longer true. Charlie's War has probably sold better in France than in the UK, which has got something to do with the sort of controls really in the UK. France is much more open to critical appraisal of things like the Great War. So anyway, that's all black and white, and they love it. So there's no reason theoretically why Spacewalk shouldn't sell in France. What do you think?
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about the possibilities of it being in Spanish because of the South American market as well. And I think these days it's sort of, especially on the digital side, it's relatively easy to give that a go. And you know, to try it digitally before you commit to print, sort of thing. Although even with print on demand, you're not really making a huge financial investment because you know, you don't have to warehouse stock or anything like that. I would love to go down that road. I think that would be really exciting. But yeah, I assume that we would want to get volume 2 out so that we've got a sense of
continuity and volume,
and a series and a sort of a feeling of longevity to it before that. But I would definitely be up for that. I think that would be great. And you know, modern the platforms, things like Comixology and Amazon, make all that stuff, you know, actually really accessible.
I don't know if you know, but Marvel New York used to have a Spanish language department, and they published their comics for about a year in Spanish. Sadly, the lady in charge died very suddenly, I think. But they published their comics in Spanish because it's the biggest language, I think, in North America. Never mind South America.
North America. Wow.
So yeah, it's worth you know, the language. Yeah. So there we go. Wee bit of comics history there. Gareth, I'm aware we haven't spoken to you for ages and ages. And I hope you've been enjoying yourself listening to the rest of it. And I think Steve Tanner just joined us. And indeed, Steve and I, with Dave Cook, are speaking later this afternoon in another part of I Love Comics. So are you looking forward to issue 2 and subsequent issues, Gareth?
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly something I'd want to be involved in. I've loved, like I say, the development of the characters and the environment so far. I'd like to see more of the world coming through Pat's writing. So I'm excited to find out what comes next for the guys. So
it's going to be the never-ending story. Just SpaceWarp 100 lurks.
I'm sure the executioners have got.
I remember years ago. Yeah. I remember years ago when Dave Sims started Cerebus, and he told everyone he was going to do 300 issues, and we all said, "Yeah, that'll be right." But he did. He did 300 self-published issues, and they're all still in print in volumes. So yes, it can be done. Can I just ask everybody, all the participants, what do you read? It's all very well to produce stuff, but do you actually read comics yourself, Gareth?
Yes, I do. I've got a big collection. If I look off camera that way, I can see a whole bunch of them there. And yeah, so I kind of grew up, I suppose, reading 2000 AD, ABC Warriors, Slain. And before that, obviously, kind of like the Beano and some of those kind of weird early Star Wars comics that was kind of tied into the movies. But it was years later, I was working for an archaeology unit, and the guy who ran the archaeology unit was a comic book creator themselves. They were actually making their own independent Beowulf kind of comic, and they were selling them mail order long before the internet. And several people in the design studio there basically were into comics, and they kind of got me back in. So I came back into comics, I suppose, around the time of Dark Knight Returns, Ronin, Watchmen, and all that lot. And then moving away to art school, there was a comic book store, Abstract Sprocket in Norwich, which is fantastic and still going. And I used to pick up my weekly order there, and I've still got loads of comics, and I still buy them now. I've got loads of kind of like French and Spanish comic, Bilal, Moebius, sort of Philip Drouillet, all that kind of stuff. Noir comics, like, you know, things like Torpedo and all that kind of stuff in my collection. I read a lot of horror comics, I suppose. I like that kind of stuff. But my big thing is you know, anything that's got a tinge of occult detective or kind of like mythical monsters and stuff like that. That's where my head's at. So.
Cool. I like it, Gareth. Yeah. I've just been corrected. Apparently, Cerebus is now out of print, but still, it lasted 300 issues, and it was in print for some years. So I'll keep it at that. Bruno, do you still read Do you still read comics? And who are your favourites? Hello, is Bruno here?
Bruno. Oh, Bruno. I think Bruno's not at his desk.
Right. Okay. He's probably going to the toilet. Do you actually?
Somebody just mentioned Black Sad in the things there. Yeah,
Yes,
fantastic.
I saw it up there. Yeah.
So beautiful.
It's a beautifully drawn comic. Yep. Yep. No, I agree with Black Sad. Is Ian there? Ian Ashcroft?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello, Ian.
Hello.
Do you read comics?
I do now. I didn't when I was younger. I didn't. They just weren't part. They weren't part of anything that my friends were into, really. So I got into comics in kind of two ways. So the first time was I was sat in a library in Cleethorpes, which is where I've moved to, and they had a shelf comics, and while my daughter was sort of very young, and I saw the work of Jay Lee, and I really liked that, and I thought, oh, this is a really good medium. And then funny enough, I fell into just trying to find loads of different artists originally that I really liked, and that actually led me to The Horned God by Pat. And then I read that, I really enjoyed that. The idea that I suppose I've only really been into comics for about 5 or 6 years. The idea of reading that book in the sort of that first year of getting into comics, and then actually working with him 5 years later, just it's amazing. And then the other thing was at the school I work in, my TA, her husband, actually, I didn't realize this at the time, but he wrote for 2000 AD. He created a character that it didn't get a great reception, but he created a character called Cinnamon, and later one called Bison, and he'd written for Caliber Comics as well. And I think he'd done a bit for Image. So he really helped me when I started out, because he was giving me scripts that I could do. I created a massive portfolio, all of sequential art that I took around Thought Bubble, and that's where I got my work with Accent UK before I started working with Pat. So it's all been quite a recent development, really, in my life. But I mean, some of the best artwork I see now, it's all comic artwork. I absolutely try and absorb as much of it as I can, and like Gareth was saying, European artists and Spanish artists as well. Just try and grab as much influences as I can. And that's it, really. That's how I got into it. I was always aware of comics because my cousin actually did collect 2000 AD, but it just wasn't something that I think I would have enjoyed comics, but the way it was when I was growing up, it was just no one did. So I never got involved in it when I was younger, but I certainly am now, and it's amazing. I love it.
That's interesting. You didn't really grow up with comics. I grew up with. That's true of a lot of people.
I grew up with book illustration then, and I can remember really being interested in book illustration and Edmund Dulac and people like that, and that was probably what what was in my family home when I was growing up. So, and like little things like Ladybird books, some of them were beautifully illustrated as well. And I can remember I'd copy out of them and stuff like that. So maybe not comics, but book illustration was definitely there.
Okay, yeah, I get you. Yeah, I was into that as well. Simon, what do you read?
I read a bit of everything, to be honest. I'm heavily into stuff like Edgar Allan Poe. I like very dark poetry, and that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from. But I still read like 2000 AD. I go constantly over Pat's stuff because it's just so revisitable. I read a lot of the Marvel comics stuff as well. Deadpool, Wolverine, and Iron Man were always like right up there for me. But a lot of my inspiration comes from video games, to be honest. You can see the systems behind me, and I've got all that on the shelves, and of course, the Star Wars stuff and whatnot. But yeah, video games are a huge part of my life because, again, escape is very easy with those. And a lot of the stories in video games are very much like comics. You've got this visual interpretation of like a single story that focuses on characters very deeply in the same way that comics do. And they try to catch your attention in that same way. And so it depends on my mood on the day, whether I'll pick up a comic or I'll pick up a video game controller. Of course, like my left hand being partially paralyzed, I've had to, again, adapt to that and get like special equipment for it. But it's really interesting how games are so much like comics. And you can even see it in like the culture now. Kids have gone away from comics somewhat and gone more into video games. And I do think like if they could do tie-ins to video games to comics, you know, and like it would revitalize both sides of the industry for people, I believe. But yeah, it's a bit of Marvel for me. It's a lot of sci-fi, a lot of horror. I like really dark comics, to be honest, when I'm reading them. Anything that's got a very deep story that you can really relate to, you know, something where the characters actually have emotion and feeling, not the throwaway comics, which were a lot of the Marvel ones. So I'm some of them I like, others I can pick up and go, I really can't get on with that. It's got to be, as I say, the deep comics. The first comic I ever read by Pat was 8 years old. It was The Horned God. When Ian mentioned it, just when
you were 8,
yay! I loved that. I had it, like I said, passed to me on my 8th birthday, so it was about 2 months after it had come out, actually. Yeah, that's what got me hooked. Slain, and I read a lot of Slain. The Dark Judges from 2000 AD are a particular fascination of mine. I think a lot of the stories that they do for the Dark Judges are fascinating. And I'll reread those over and over because of the artwork as well. There's a lot of glorious artwork in those. Nick Percival does some really interesting artwork for 2000 AD on the Dark Judges stuff. It's like watercolor paintings, and yeah, I'm not usually a fan of color for horror art, but he hits the nail on the head. And yeah, like I say, it's a lot of dark stuff. I also watch a lot of stuff like Black Mirror, which relates to Future Shock, I think, from 2000 AD. They're very, you know, they're very synchronized. Yeah. And it's stuff like that, stuff that makes you think. That's what I like from comics. Yes, I do like your throwaway characters like Deadpool and whatnot, because that's what they are. You pick them up once and there's not really much chance to revisit, apart from Night of the Living Deadpool. They did like a crossover. And again, that was quite a dark story because it sees Deadpool and the world is ended. So he's like the only guy left. And it's really interesting that is, you've just got zombies, but Deadpool can actually hear the zombies, and they're going like, I don't want to eat people, what's going on? So those are really interesting comics. But yeah, the darker the better. I've even got some Edgar Allan Poe. It's called Nevermore, I think, that was translated into a comic. Stuff like that fascinates me. I think it's Joe O'Barr that did The Crow. His stuff, yeah, I loved that growing up. That I went through about 3 copies of that because the covers kept on falling off because of how much I read them. But yeah, the early 2000 AD stuff, anything black and white really draws me into it. As you can probably see by my artwork, I love those black and white aesthetics. I think they bounce off the page a lot more than color. Color can easily get muddied up to the eye. If you've got a color like 6 or 7 panels of color on a page, you've got to actually really pay attention to each panel to pick it up. Whereas the black and white stuff, as soon as you open it, it's in your face, it's there, and you can see everything that's on the page without having to concentrate. It's like, wow, that's good art. Whereas with the color ones, you have to look for the art behind the color almost. So anything black and white, I'll pick up, to be honest, as well. I'm quite varied.
Yeah, I get you. Although I don't know if we're going to loan you any copies of The Crow, because obviously you'll completely destroy them. But anyway,
no,
Phil really Vaughan was making a wee. Is Phil there? You're making a wee point about games design, Phil.
Yeah, just to pick up on the point that there's a myth that sort of video games killed comics in the 80s, and it's not entirely true. There's an element of that, I think. But what interested me, I used to work in the games industry, and a lot of the comics contacts that I've got are actually from the video games industry when a lot of comic artists moved over to concept art, and that was and that still happens. It's not very well publicized, but there's quite a lot of crossover of people working both ways. Comic creators.
I actually did concept art for video games before, like, ever touching comic art.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely more crossover than people think, and they're compatible up to a point, I think. Obviously the storytelling aspects are different. Even if you're storyboarding video games, I used to work on cutscenes. For video games, but you would storyboard that in a completely different way than you would create a comic. But the core skills are the same. So I think it's interesting that crossover is often kind of, well, not frowned upon, but there's often this myth that, kids don't have time for comics. And I've got to admit, I don't particularly find that to be true, personally speaking. And
it's not that they don't have time for it, in my opinion. I think they sort of spend their money more on it, if you get what I mean by that. And also, it's more what I mean by the advertising to kids. Games are very much in your face now, whereas like in the 80s and 90s, it was comics that were more in your face in shops. They were easier to find. Now it's more difficult to find comics on shelves for kids. And so they don't see them to pick up. Whereas the games, they're pushed on them, like all over Facebook and social media. Games are very much like post about gaming. All YouTube and everything, it's all about gaming. And yet for me, it's not so much that the kids don't want to pick them up or haven't got time. It's more how the media publicize each of them. So as I say, before comics were pushed towards kids, now it's more games and like digital apps and stuff that are pushed on the kids. And the kids will like pick up, I've got kids myself that will happily pick up comics. They love them. But the gaming is what's thrown upon them almost. It's not that they don't want to read the comics or anything. It's just what's pushed on. And that's why I'm like, if they did crossovers, I think they'd do great. Like, as in, if the games came out with a comic, I think kids would happily sit and read them. They love it.
Yeah, there's not as much. There's not as much of that as you'd think, and I think the problem is as well with newsagents, and over the last 20 years or so, you can't go into a sort of newsagent anymore and pick up a comic and flick through it, because most of them are banned. It's slightly fallen out of favour now. But I think the idea of proper crossovers with games is something. It's an interesting point that Pat made about the cover design and it kind of pointing towards a sort of Fortnite type of styling and design work. I think that's important. I think even considering Rebellion's a games company, I'm surprised there's not more crossover there between.
Exactly.
and the games.
I think sometimes it's about getting them into the spaces that kids inhabit, and I'm not going to use the word gatekeeping because I don't think that's really it. There's a kind of a cultural reticence, I think, on the part of some teachers and some parents that basically see comics as lower art. And,
yes, definitely.
And so to get comics into the hands of kids, you need adults there to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
And there's other situations as well where it's obvious. I mean, cinema is a massive thing with culture, with comic crossovers, but I still think that people are missing a trick. If they really want the comics industry to survive, then you put spinners in the foyers of cinemas, and the comic book movie that's out that week or that month has comics on the racks, because then you're going to self-fulfill that continuation of an audience from one to the other. And they can come out of the cinema and they want the next movie straight away, but instead of a movie, there's a comic book that they can take up, and then there's another comic, and then there's another comic, and then there's another comic, and there's like 40 comics between that movie and the next movie. But
and let's face it,
it's like for some reason I think that it's almost like lawyers have drawn a line between the media representations of the same kind of like IP, and so you can't show the comic books and the films in the same space, which is odd when you look at the logos for all the companies that sort of like make films about comics, because they try and show it there. But it has been, you know, that thing. I mean, I used to teach as well. I used to teach games design and illustration, and the amount of kids that would come and you go, right, okay, this comic, that comic, and even film, to be fair, the lack of awareness of some of those bits of media that, you know, that we all grew up on for whatever reason, but it just doesn't seem to be into the hands of some of the kids, which is a shame. Whereas in other cultures, obviously in Europe and everything, it's a big thing. We know why it's seen as low art in America, you know, because of the whole kind of like, you know, the kind of like the court cases and everything that came about. And I don't think it's ever recovered. And it's a weird thing when you consider that, I suppose, out of all of this stuff, even if you include games, comics are seen as the kid of visual media, the child of visual media, yet it's probably as old, if not older, than cinema, which makes it one of the oldest, you know, barring painting and sculpture and dance, it's one of the oldest, you know, so it's weird.
As you were saying, comics are sort of almost frowned upon by a lot of people. And I've had conversations with friends that I've known for years that have gone, oh, I didn't read comics as a kid, I read books, thank you. And you're like, why are you looking down your nose? You know, it's still reading, it's still getting entertainment. I mean, let's face it, look at something like 50 Shades of Grey, for example. You can't tell me that that's more intellectual than a comic, you know what I mean?
and the thing about it is comics are different. And yes, there are maybe some sort of like crossovers between, you know, storylines and the choice of stories between sort of like the mainstream comics and mainstream games. And maybe there is a visual connection to cinema in the fact that it's sequential and that storyboards sometimes look a little like comics. And yes, there's the same connection to novels in the fact that you can tell any kind of story in comics and everything like that. But comics are incredibly different. And I did a workshop for some guys down at DEFRA in Bristol about comics. I was invited to go down there and talk about comics because we're looking at passing information to people who don't have a lot of time to absorb information, and they were looking at new ways to deal with it. And so we had a discussion about using comics to get information about environmental concerns and climate change over to people who only have a few moments, and how you can do it. And it was interesting. So, you know, my part of the workshop was basically discussing the fact that on a single page of a comic book, you can have multiple timelines running at the same time, multiple conversations happening in different rooms and different environments, beginnings and endings of stories all shown on the same page, and yet the physical turning of a page will also still add a surprise into it. And those properties of comics are completely unique and don't happen in other media at all. Even split screen cinema and TV doesn't have the same properties where you can look at the images at the same time and read the dialogue that's happening crossed over. You can have voiceovers by characters that aren't in the room. You can have a whole range of different sort of narrative structures happening in comics that just don't happen in any other medium.
I think that very much with the Deadpool movies that came out. In the comics, he's got like about 7 personalities, and they're done with like different color and different shape bubbles. It's shown in the comics, so that you see that it's a different person talking in his head each time. And of course, there's no way of showing that on cinema.
And I don't think it's been fully explored either. I don't think comics aren't a done medium where everything's been explored. I think they're underexplored, and I think there's still if we're thinking about comics as physical print, and obviously multiple options for digital, but in physical print, the actual physical boundaries of the comic book have not been fully explored yet as a
totally agree.
Especially like fashion guys, yeah. I'm just going to say we've got about 10 minutes left. Pat, you seem to have an absolutely great team around you. They're all committed to this new project. I take it you're quite pleased with how things turned out with SpaceWarp?
I'm absolutely delighted. It's very exciting, yeah. And I'm just wondering, in the time we have left, I see there's quite a number, or have been a number of questions running down the side. Is there anyone in particular that jumps out? There was one you mentioned to me ahead of the Zoom session. I think it was something to do with how the industry split works, how royalties work. I haven't got it in front of me, but shall I address that one?
Yes, why not? Yes.
Okay. Well, the industry standard on comics, and this is a universal rule. There will be variations, but it's pretty much there. Is 50% to publisher, 25% to writer, 25% to artist. And as I say, there'll be variations on that, and that applies to certainly to France. And it probably applies one way or another to DC Comics and Marvel and so forth. Now, when you have comic companies that buy all rights, DC Thompson's, for example, they don't pay anything. Rebellion pay a very small percentage, which is way below industry standard. So to give you an example of how that works, got here, this is the Hachette edition, the one that's sold in newsagents. And Slane was the #1 starter. So they brought it out at a low price and with a low rubbish royalties on it. That meant that what Rebellion themselves described as the crown jewels of 2000 AD, I made 129 quid, which is disgraceful. Now, by comparison, and I think the questioner was asking, how does it work on SpaceWarp? Well, we could have gone in at 50% to publisher, 25% to artist, 25% to writer, but we felt that would, well, it sounds unfair because Lisa's the publisher, so it'd be like 75% or something. To us
collectively.
Yeah. So we worked on a different principle above industry standard. So it's a third to writer, a third to artist, and a third to publisher. And I think that feels better for all round. It creates this sense of teammanship, I think, and it works. And as I was saying earlier, we've paid the artist the royalties already within 3 months.
The page rate.
Yeah, and obviously they go on getting royalties in the future, but we've met that page rate already. Now, if we can do that within 3 months, what is happening with millionaires who own Rebellion, who are paying me that by comparison? It's shameful. And one of the reasons for doing SpaceWarp, which I think is important, is, as I say, I could moan about this forever, but the answer is you've got to get out and provide an alternative. And that's happened often in the past in comics. There's a long tradition of this, really before our generation. The original Eagle, although I don't agree with its social politics, so to speak, it came out because they wanted to prove something. And it was a huge success, the original Eagle. They wanted to bring out what you might call, I suppose, middle-class values. And it worked. And of course, it was hated by the comic establishment, who cheered when it eventually died a decade or so later, because it's the outsiders challenging the status quo, the establishment. And that's where we're at today. So that's the context of what we're doing on Spacewalk.
Listen, I'd just like to thank everybody for their participation today. I'm sorry that I didn't have more skills in Zoom technique. I'll buy Zoom for Dummies or something like that.
At least you weren't a cat.
What's up on it? Or maybe somebody could do a comic book Zoom for Dummies. Sorry, Simon.
I said at least you didn't appear as a cat.
What was that? Oh.
You did appear as a cat.
Time's fading there. Haha, yes. 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 I noticed that error that person had made the other day. So I'm using a different operating system and a different version of Zoom. So we've managed to do that. So anyway, I'd just like to thank everybody. Lest everybody suddenly disappears because the signal goes. I'm just going to kind of wind it up there. There are other things on today on I Love Comics, so please check out the website, etc., and ComicScene. And remember, we've got 100-issue ComicScene History of Comics, so your favourite comics should appear there at some point. Someone mentioned earlier on Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk, which I've been thoroughly enjoying, just to make sure that we've mentioned Al's comic there. And Spacewarp has been, as we've obviously agreed, an enormous success. So I'd like to thank everybody, especially thanks to Lisa and Pat for joining us from, I hope, sunny Spain. This is me speaking from very snowy, slippy Glasgow.
It's definitely.
And it's great to see something like Zoom, that when we are locked down and we can't get a convention, at least we can have a rare